Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to Watchbox, and thanks for logging on. It's that time again. We are waking up this weekend with watches, and everything is for sale. Prices are in the description below when available. Names and references also listed below. Reach out to tmosso at thewatchbox.com to buy, trade, or sell. Everything here can be purchased through that email address. And of course, if you are selling, we are buying solo watches or full collections. Once again, if you want to sell, reach out to tmosso at thewatchbox.com. Let's jump straight into a big piece. Originally retailed in 2007, this is the timeless Lemagne-based Patek Philippe 5970R. The R model, which was built from 2004 through 2007, is, as with all 5970s, perfectly proportioned, 40 millimeters in diameter, and exquisite in its details. The relatively short-lived and much-loved successor to the long-running 3970, this watch has the same fundamental running gear, but it is a more imposing watch with dramatic stepped-out lug profiles, a concave bezel, a stepped and curved case flank, and of course those vintage-inspired extended rectangular pushers on the dial. Everything you love about Patek Philippe Perpetual calendar chronographs dating back to the very first examples in the 1940s. You have outboard a tachymeter scale. It's beautifully balanced. You can actually split it down the center. It has bilateral symmetry. The watch, of course, powered by the exquisite Lemagne 2310 based 2770Q. Let's get a little bit closer. Oops. And you can see it is an extraordinarily beautiful movement. As all of these were built in the rose gold series before mid-2009, they all have the Poinçon de Genève. All 5970s combined probably amount to no more than 2,800 pieces, of which perhaps 1,000 were rose gold. 65-hour power reserve, overcoil hairspring, 5-position adjustment, Gyromax style free-sprung balance, and of course you have that lush combination of column wheel and lateral clutch with the column wheel polished and capped. Steel levers, horns, and reset hammers for the chronograph, and brass bridges rhodium plated for the remainder of the structure. You can see the broad and mirrored anglage as well as all of the polished screw heads. The chamfer, not just to the bridges but also to the edges of the chronograph components, which are rendered in steel, making the polish that much more impressive. Let's throw this watch on the wrist. I should mention that it does include a full deploying clasp, a lovely and highly collectible piece. Of course, far more exclusive than the subsequent 5270. This is a watch that combines everything you loved about the 3970 with a more imposing wrist stance. Unlike that 36 millimeter and change predecessor, this one just over 40 millimeters has a lot of stance, presence, shoulder, and yes, it is an imposing look without being oversized. Perpetual calendar and a chronograph, it is the best of Patek Philippe. Now we may as well jump straight into another impressive chronograph. That watch you saw was retailed in 2007. This one launched in 2007, and it was the Time Zone Watch of the Year, the Jaeger-LeCoultre Duometre chronograph, a timepiece, 42 millimeters in exquisite and traditional yellow gold. You can see it's cold in here. There's a little bit of condensation on the side. This is a watch that represents a model I owned. I owned the white gold variant. This one, 300 pieces, a limited series that is exquisite thanks to the detail, which is delicate. On the dial side, you can see the oxidized hands for the chronograph. You've got your seconds, you've got your hours, you've got your tens of minutes. There is a scrolling single-digit minutes disc for the chronograph. You can see you have the foudroyant, or 1/6 of a second hand, which allows you to resolve the time to 1/6 of a second when you stop the chronograph. The reset is a wonderful little piece of horological theater, and then you have twin power reserves for the two movements inside one case. 50 hours and 50 hours, all the yellow gold numerals as well as hands tell the time of day, and note the use of coaxial chronograph and running seconds at the center of the watch. Now the dial is a lovely eggshell. It's off-white, it's lightly creamy, it has a bit of an eggnog coloration to it, and when you turn the watch over you can see this extraordinary caliber 380 based on a Victorin Piguet Bausch from the 1880s that was finished by Jaeger-LeCoultre to become a minute repeating chronometer. The 380 looks back to the 19th century in that its architecture and even the materials used are much like a pocket watch. That's why it has that same golden luster that you see see on a Lange watch, for example, as both the Duometre and all Lange models draw on the imagery of the pocket watch era. Now, this is also a level of finish you don't get on standard JLC watches. Indeed, even some of the Master Grand Tradition watches priced in the six figures are not finished to the standard of the Duometre, and by that, I mean this watch has beautifully broad and rounded anglage, not a machined bevel. It has a wonderful Côte de Soleil that radiates out from an imaginary center point atop the balance. Yes, it features mechanical refinements you expect, such as column wheel actuation and stop seconds, with a free-sprung balance beating way at 21.6, and you have two powertrains. One is for the chronograph, one is for the time, and you wind them in different directions with the same crown. One will ratchet while the other winds, and note the use of a pawl and spring system, much like you would see on a vintage pocket watch. Two drivetrains, one escapement. The escapement starts and stops the alternate sides. So one side is running, then one side stops. One side is running, then the other side stops, and it alternates back and forth with a single balance for both sides. It is two watches in one case. Let's throw this one on the wrist. I should mention that JLC was pinching no pennies back then, so you got a full deployment clasp to match. Aside from my white gold black dial model, I have to say this is probably my second favorite Duometre, as the combination of the yellow gold with the golden colored movement, that due to the copper content, along with the eggshell dial, makes this an uncommonly handsome watch. And if we were speaking before of imposing wrist presence with the 5970, at 50 millimeters lug to lug by 42 millimeters in diameter, this watch ups the ante in every regard. One of the most important chronographs of the modern era from one of the greatest brands in horology. And, I should say, the most accurate mechanical watch I ever owned. Now let's talk about a watch that is much loved. Despite only coming out 2 years ago, people are already talking about the Omega Speedmaster Moonwatch Apollo 8, the dark side of the moon, effectively a watch that is a tribute to Apollo 8, which passed around the dark side of the moon. As this watch draws on the case imagery of the 2013 dark side, but with a very different dial, and some of the extravagant lume that debuted on the 2014 gray side. Now you can see you do have a moonscape on the dial created by laser ablation, and there are a few well-chosen shocks of yellow varnish that pop against the dial base. You'll also note there are cantilevered indices that are appliqué and polished, and they hang over the center. So while this watch is extravagant in its look, it's also easy to read. You turn it over, and what we have here is the dark side case, but the Moonwatch caliber, here reconfigured for both handsome aesthetic as well as a match to the dial, as the Continental laser ablated back is perfectly matched. It's a tonal match, a thematic match, and a wonderful piece of imagery that recalls, of course, Apollo 8 in December of 1868. We will see you on the other side. And Apollo 8 was the first space capsule to witness not a sunrise, but an earthrise over the edge of the moon. 48-hour power reserve, cam lateral clutch, 21.6 beat rate, 19 joules, technically identical to the standard Moonwatch caliber 1861. Now we're going to throw this one on the wrist. I should mention the full ceramic case is super light and scratch resistant, and Omega goes the extra distance, giving you a full matching pin and buckle in ceramic. This is where a lot of watch brands are just going to give you PVD titanium that'll scratch. Omega going all the way. Full ceramic from top to bottom with this watch. It is broad, but it is not overwhelming. As it's a manual wind, it's thinner than your standard dark side, so it sits flatter on the wrist, and you can see this down the barrel shot. It's a good match for my 16 centimeter circumference wrist. There's the overhead shot. I think you'll find this watch wears well on a wrist as small as 14 centimeters. Let's do a lume shot. One of the unforgettable qualities of the original gray side was the use of a fully lumed tachymeter and a fully lumed crown insert, and the Apollo 8 absolutely follows in the footsteps of that pioneering design. Arguably the best of the gray side and the dark side, with a dial and a case back unlike any other. Now, in the realm of lume shots, I don't think I have anything on set that can beat this. This, of course, is the SBGJ 237, now available pre-owned. It is a 2020 model, a watch 44.2 millimeters in diameter. It is a high-beat GMT, and as you can see, it is an extravagant watch. Black polished Zaratsu tin plate finishing to the case flank. You can see There's a lot of condensation today, as it is a cold office. The watch has a wonderful aesthetic, as it's almost a tonneau when viewed in profile, with a lovely camber and a complex curvature about its hand-finished sides. The bezel, which is a GMT bezel, as you can see, is covered in sapphire, and the watch beats away with the caliber 9S86 inside. 36,000 vibrations per hour, 10 beats per second, so it has a very smooth sweep to the seconds hand, yet it still has a 55-hour power reserve in spite of the extra hand for the second time zone, as well as the high beat rate. Now, of course, you can move everything in sync. The dial furniture here is outstanding, with the logo, the aperture for the date, the hands, and the indices themselves being individually finished with diamond-tipped milling tools so that they twinkle like cut gems. And well, you can't quite see it in my light box. The watch has a metallic blue dial. You can't see a whole lot through the case back because it's solid, but rest assured this is a true sports watch that is 200 meters water resistant. So this is a full service Sportster. Big, make no mistake, at 44 millimeters, but it doesn't wear quite as large as that size would suggest. It feels considerably more compact on the wrist than, say, a Royal Oak Offshore in the 44 millimeter size. Let's take a look at a lume shot, and this is the benefit of the full sapphire cap on the bezel. The whole bezel can be lumed. There you go. Close encounters. This is one heck of a UFO sighting. This one flies by night. You'll also note that the 24-hour second time zone hand is fully lumed. All right, this one you should already know. I didn't properly charge this watch before taking a lume shot, but you probably already recognize the most famous sapphire bezel watch in all of high horology, and that, of course, is the Blancpain 50 Fathoms. Now this model is a bit uncommon because, as you can see, it's rendered in rose gold. This is a watch that's usually executed in titanium or steel, and in a lot of ways the rose gold pulls from both the titanium model and the steel models with the best of both. You can see the case shape is actually satin finished just like the titanium, which given the size of the watch and the intensity of the red gold is a good move by Blancpain. Now the watch also includes all of the fundamental features of the standard steel watch, including 300 meter water resistant, hex screw and bar fixed strap. You have the sapphire, and note it is a cambered sapphire, cap on the bezel. This is important because it's more expensive, and the Blancpain partly justifies its price because, as you can see, there's just a flat crystal on top of the bezel of the Grand Seiko. With the Blancpain, everything's a bit more heavily cambered, both at center and on the bezel. The refinement of the case, which is hand-finished, adds another distinguishing element. While the Grand Seiko is hand-finished, most of the rivals to the Blancpain are not. This watch, of course, with a 3-day power reserve, an anti-magnetic iron shield around the movement, much like a Rolex Milgauss, 3 mainspring barrels. You've got that 3-day automatic wind power reserve, free sprung, it beats away at 28.8. It has hacking seconds. It has a quick set date. It has everything you might want for a serious dive watch, but you're going to want to change the strap if that's how you wish to use it, because this model is an upscale variant of the 50 Fathoms. And 45 millimeters, though nice and compact, under 51 millimeters lug to lug. As with the Grand Seiko, it wears a bit smaller than its nominal size. If you can wear a 42 millimeter steel watch, I believe you can wear this 45 millimeter watch. This is a timepiece that wears smaller than its nominal size. It will never be thin, but it is nice and short across the wrist. Taking a quick look at the hardware and the software, I always like to shout out the use of a strap on a diver because it always looks good. I feel like Rolex should offer a leather strap on the Submariner or the Yachtmaster. When it looks this good, why not? Will you want to switch it to a sailcloth strap for swimming? Of course you will, but at the end of the day, most of our diving is desk diving, and this strap, which just looks the business, is a wonderful way to spend the 99% of the time that you and your watch will share. Now, I spoke of the Royal Oak Offshore 44, but the fact is every Royal Oak wears larger than its nominal size. This is a 26331 ST with the post-2017 anniversary dial, of course. That was 20 years since the first Royal Oak chronograph, and this stainless steel blue dial silver register model features the design elements from the 2017 year, which includes redesigned hands and indices, a smaller register for the constant seconds, as well as the look of the previous screw-down pushers, but as you can see, they are merely shouldered crown guards. You do not need to screw them in or out. These little shouldered guards are static, and you can actuate the chronograph at any time. You will note there is a little clamshell on this watch, so if you're wondering what that fuzz and haze over the watch is, it's simply the sheath that protects the watch. Now, though it's a 41 millimeter, the watch wears larger. As you can see across the wrist, from solid link to solid link, those little plots on the edge, they span 54 millimeters across the wrist, which means this wears bigger than its nominal size. Think of it more as a 43 millimeter watch. You really have to go into the 41 millimeter Royal Oak with the idea that you're looking more at a baby offshore than a larger version of the Jumbo. Inside, you have a Frédéric Piguet 1185 doing business as the Audemars Piguet caliber 2385, vertical clutch, column wheel, 5-position adjustment, high horology finish, 40-hour power reserve, screw-down crown with a 50-meter water resistance, so it is surface swimmable. But what you're really paying for with this watch isn't necessarily the movement, which is excellent and worthy, but the finish. The bracelet by itself takes 10 hours to finish. This kind of execution on steel is actually more difficult to render than on gold. So this watch, with everything you would expect from an Audemars Piguet Royal Oak, including these little polished ends to the intermediate links, they're only really visible when you roll the links through the light. Now you can also see there's a perfect alignment of the polished bevel along the side and an expanding bevel that flares from almost minuscule at the case flying to quite broad over the edge of the lugs. The pantograph cut dial made in-house at AP since 2012. This lovely, we will call it the Grande Tapisserie because this is the middle of the two between the Petite and the Mega. It uses a pantograph, essentially a 19th century mimicry engine, to recreate a large template on the brass blank that eventually becomes the Grande Tapisserie dial. This is a watch that soars. High style, timeless elegance, a model that will live forever and always be in fashion. This is Audemars Piguet. It is the embodiment of everything Le Brasseux represents. Here's an unconventional face and a model that debuted back in 1999, having already previewed his Perpetual Ludwig bidirectional perpetual calendar in 1996. 3 years later, Ludwig Oxlin combined his unique perpetual calendar with a thoroughly practical travel time complication, creating the Ulysse Nardin Perpetual GMT plus minus. The GMT plus minus is exactly what the name implies, with pushers on each side allowing you to rapidly and easily cycle in both directions with no hazard to the perpetual calendar. You have a second time zone in 24-hour format. All of this is loomed. The watch is outstanding as it's quite compact, just over 38 millimeters in diameter. And on my wrist, let's take a quick look at this watch, which you will also note is in white gold. Comfortable, compact, technically proficient, and attractive. Well, Ulysse Nardin design sometimes went off the rails in the 2000s. This product of the late 1990s is perfect in its design. From its size to its proportions to its details, this is a real-world watch, not a circus stunt. You'll also appreciate the fact that the Perpetual remains as brilliant today as it was back then. Taking a quick pull of the crown, let's get it to its intermediate position. You are able to set the calendar both forward and backwards, meaning that this is a year 2100 compliant perpetual calendar. When all the rest need to go back to the factories for resetting, this one will be easily adjustable, simply making a one-day adjustment in the year 2100. You'll also note that this is a very comprehensive perpetual, intuitive to read with apertures, and as you can see, it even includes the year. Now, through the case back, you can see Ulysse Nardin caliber 32, which is distantly based on a La Manna automatic. It's also beautifully executed as the combination of mostly machine-finished elements is becoming, and I would also say befitting, of a true high horology watch. It has a 48-hour power reserve automatic winding, and once again, the sizing and the detail of this one, this is a discretion with which Ulysse Nardin is rarely associated. My favorite features are the gorgeous welded-on lugs with fluted flanks. This is a masterpiece to find. What is the most recognizable watch from Glashutte Original? Well, it would have to be either the PanoInverse or, for those who prefer the convenience, of automatic winding, the 2014 to present Panomatic Inverse. And that's exactly what we get here with this caliber 91 Panomatic Inverse. 42 millimeters in red gold. This is a watch that combines everything Geo is known for, from German-style finish to impressive manufacture watchmaking to the extravagant inverted movement of the PanoInverse series. Now, the watch is broad, but it's not completely oversized. The lug spacing is very narrow, and you can see my tiny wrist, 16 centimeters, has plenty of clearance on both sides. It's not a thick watch. We'll slip underneath the cuff, and we'll do a down-the-barrel shot right here. You can see there is plenty of space on each side, and I'm putting the strap in tension as though it were sized for my wrist. Let's take a quick look at the dial, because the caliber 91 is extraordinary. You'll note double freehand engraving both sides of the balance bridge, a double black polished duplex swan's neck fine adjustment system. There is a double-digit date, the Pano in PanoInverse, of course, the Panorama Datum, and this one, unlike many Geo watches, actually features a quick set mechanism so you can rapidly cycle that date. There are Glashutte stripes on the dial side, engine turning on the base plate. You can also see the mirrored anglage on the edge of these bridges with the freehand engraving, meaning no two will be exactly alike. There's not quite as much action on the reverse side, though it's handsome and accomplished. For the most part, this is a watch that brings the magic of a display case back to the front side of the watch, and that's exactly what you get with this handmade watch from Eastern Germany from the company I need remind you that is the legal successor to the original A Lange und Sonne. If you were to draw a line from 1845 to 2020, it would not pass through Richemont's A Lange und Sonne. That original company, F.A. Lange and his sons, is today Glashutte Original, and they have earned that nomenclature. A truly spectacular and brand-defining watch from them. Rolex. I know my colleague Brandon Wood is going to love this one. He has the original 2008 to 2012 lacquer blue dial. This is the post-2013 model by popular demand. Rolex bringing the 116613LB back to the future with the original sunburst blue metallic dial. As ever with the sub, 40 millimeters in diameter and a lush combination of Rolex 904L oyster steel with Rolex's own foundry smelted yellow gold. This is still a sports watch, 300 meters water resistant and a 12.6 millimeters thick, remarkably thin for an automatic diver. It is a chronometer, it is anti-magnetic, and unlike a standard, for example, shall we say Datejust Explorer 2 or Milgauss, this watch includes an enormous degree of adjustability inside the clasp, as you have, due to the diving architecture, the glide lock system. You have 10 steps of 2 millimeters, so you can use it for fine sizing if you just happen to be perhaps out on a hot day or a cold day, or you can pull it out all the way to extend over a diving suit, or in my case, a thick winter coat. Since this is a diver, and divers are all about legibility, let's do a lume shot. And first, I should mention, let's hear the bezel. Let's hear it. No bezel is more refined than a Rolex bezel. Grand Seiko and Blancpain come close, but Rolex is still the mark to beat. Impressive given that the basic chassis of this watch has been around since 2008. It remains a leader in that regard. Now for that lume shot. Rolex Chromolite Blue Lume. As with so many things, Rolex builds its lume in-house. Its own formulation designed to be particularly visible as you descend into the depths. Note that all three hands on the dial are lumed. Many dive watches do not feature lumed seconds hands, and I do not know why. The bezel pearl itself, in typical Rolex fashion, is over-engineered, as the little light at the edge of the bezel is actually covered by its own miniature sapphire. And that seems to be a watch that's gaining traction. Now, what I love here with this W series mid-1990s Rolex Day Date, it is a 18206 in platinum. It is the extravagance of the myriad dial on a blue metallic base. This is known as the myriad dial, and as you can see, it features a myriad of diamonds in several different sizes, immaculately selected for quality, color, of course, carats, and cut. And you can see all of that creating a symmetry from gem to gem and slot to slot that defines Rolex watchmaking, because all of these are going to be laser sorted. They have that evenness of color all the way around. Now, the watch does feature a dramatic series of contrasts between the white gold track in which the diamonds are set, the blue of the dial, and also the inner, outer, and if you note very closely, the tritium signature of the hands. There's a little bit of tritium patina on the hands themselves, so there are a lot of different color, texture, tonal, and material elements on this dial that create contrast. It is immensely charismatic. It is, of course, of the double quickset generation, and this one has all of its original platinum. You can see that the edges of the lugs remain absolutely sharp. The break between the satin finish and the polish, as good as the day it left Geneva back in the mid-1990s. The watch 100 meters water-resistant automatic winding and a chronometer with a Rolex President bracelet from the period that has very little play, really no more than when it was made. A watch that was probably scarcely worn, as it is an extravagant piece, and for many it will not be an all occasions watch. Nevertheless, it has the same fundamental architecture as the movement you'll find in the Sub and the Sea Dwellers, meaning internally it's rough, tough stuff, and externally it has the look that defines opulence in the Rolex empire. While they have made more expensive watches, they have made more jewel festooned models. There is nothing quite like a full platinum Day Date to define the apex of the Rolex tech tree. The Rolex, perhaps not tech tree, but pecking order, the food chain, and this is the predator at the top. That's exactly how I would describe this watch. You'll also note the use of the conical bezel, which is uncommon on the platinum models, and the President bracelet here is extraordinarily gorgeous because its original structural integrity is intact. It wears with the solidity of an oyster bracelet, but with the small link flexibility and souplesse that you get with the Jubilee. Again, defining the top of the heap at Rolex, that is the Day Date in platinum. Now let's talk about a watch that's actually fairly new. This is another 2020 watch that is just beginning to become available pre-owned. This is the Tag Heuer Carrera Caliber Heuer 02. It uses the movement that initially was described during development, the caliber 1969, then it became the CH80, and finally the Chevenet plant that was created just to build this movement started turning them out as the Heuer 02, first in the tourbillon and later in conventional chronographs. This model, 44 millimeters in stainless steel, is 100 meters water resistant with a metallic green dial that has some lush and lovely details such as the circular concentric brushing, and then you can see the cantilever of these rhodium plated and polished steel applique indices. There's a lovely depth thanks to the Rehaut outboard, and as you will note, the movement does include an 80-hour power reserve. Let's take a quick look at that Heuer 02. I don't know if you can quite see, but there's a visible column wheel up at the top of the movement. There is a vertical clutch, which allows for smooth engagement and continuous operation of the chronograph. You have the 80-hour power reserve, the automatic winding, stop seconds, a quick set date. It pivots on 33 jewels, and though the finish is mechanical, the look is attractive. Although there are several versions of this watch, many of which include a ceramic bezel, this steel-on-steel model with green dial is my favorite, and in my opinion, the most cohesive and probably the most enduring design in the catalog of this new Carrera Heuer 02. A lovely and accomplished watch with a long history dating back to 1963. You could easily argue that the two icons of Heuer or Tag Heuer are going to be the Monaco and the Carrera probably edging the Monaco for relevance and popularity. This is a watch that has almost continuously been in the catalog, whereas the Monaco has disappeared for long swaths of time, and this might be the most attractive current version of the Carrera. Let's talk about Patek Philippe. Now, we spoke about the 5970 Perpetual calendar chronograph. That is an iconic model line in Patek history, but some of the best Patek Philippe watches of recent years were part of the 175th anniversary collection back in 2014, 1839 to 2014, and the collection played on the strengths of the brand. None of the models were completely alien to what the company had done before, but perhaps none elaborated more beautifully or more poetically on an existing model line than the 5575 moon phase that I have here. Obviously, the Patek Philippe world time watches, such as at the time the 5130, represented a significant and historically relevant horological innovation at Patek. They've been doing those watches since the 1930s. The combination here of a photorealistic moon phase creates a delicious pairing, as you have the combination of world time and photorealistic moon phase on a single disc, all blacked out, and as you can see, Geneva replacing Paris, the home city of Patek Philippe, on the world time reference ring. You'll also appreciate the gorgeous white gold hands, immaculately finished and with geometries that are unusual and attractive, while paying reference to much loved past models, such as, for example, the 5110. Now, we have a world time function that does all the math for you, moving the 24-hour reference ring, your own city of reference, and the hour hand at the center. So, for example, my current city is Mexico. If I want to step to New York, the watch does all of the math for me, and that is a system co-developed by Patek Philippe and Louis Coutier. He developed the original circumferential reference rings and 24 reference cities in the 30s, and then Patek continued to innovate, adding the pusher-adjuster system that reselects and reshuffles your reference city back in the 1950s. You'll also note that this is not the case of the 5130. This is a 39.8 millimeter case in white gold that shows just how far Patek Philippe case making has come since it purchased Atelier Réuni back in 1981 and started crafting its own cases. More than any case short of a Moser endeavor, this watch looks as though Patek took molten white gold, drew it out, and flash froze it while still preserving the fluid forms, the almost liquid aesthetic of these lugs, which seem to melt around the case and then drip off the ends. It is absolutely gorgeous, and thanks to the dial, which is glossy and almost bottomless at its center, this watch has a luster and a luminous look that frankly makes it almost irresistible. As a 1300 piece limited edition, it's not particularly rare, though they rarely come up for sale because most people who are able to get them tend to hold them, understanding that regardless of production numbers, this watch was so special and so different from anything else in the catalog that it stands apart as perhaps the iconic model from the anniversary year. And you can see the Patek Philippe anniversary buckle. Even the buckle on the clasp was customized for this watch. And on the reverse side, you can see the watch includes a dedication 1839 to 2014. There were some small scratches on the case back, but full disclosure, it's a pre-owned watch. The solid case back allowing the dedication to be engraved, but also making the watch thinner, as it's only 8.9 millimeters thick in spite of the complications and the automatic winding, which I should mention is the caliber 240 HU micro rotor. I have to admit, this is the first time I've had one of these in the studio. These high horology Panerai Lo Scienziato and Tourbillon watches do not come along often. Launched in 150 pieces in black ceramic for the 2010 special series, this is the PAM 350, the Radiomir Tourbillon GMT, 6-day power reserve, second time zone, 30-second tourbillon. This is a timepiece for the ages. It is of epic scale. At 48 millimeters, it's 100 meters water resistant, so throw it on a different strap than this Panerai Assolutamente, and you will find that it is perfectly swimmable. It is thick, no joke, but you can see this isn't a watch to disappear underneath a cuff. Because the case itself is pretty much 48 millimeters square, I can recommend it for a small wrist. You'll note there is no overlap of the case edge with my wrist, and the lugs themselves are so spare as to be barely there. The watch does have a wonderful lume shot, and as you can see, it features a rotisserie-like spit turning the tourbillon, so the tourbillon beats on one axis, and then the carriage rotates on another. This helps more than a conventional tourbillon to equalize the effects of gravity on the timing of the watch. Now, the tourbillon carriage is entirely hand-finished with a level of anglage you will not see on any standard Panerai watch. You'll also note, when the tourbillon reaches the correct orientation, that individual numbering in the series of 150 is visible on the tourbillon. I'm going to hold it up to the mic because these watches make an unmistakable and quite pronounced sound. I hope you can hear this. The tourbillon rotates in 30-second circuits faster than a standard tourbillon. So not only do we have two axes for the balance, but we also have that higher rotation rate. Now, the watch does include a second time zone. You can see there's an AM-PM distinction at 3 o'clock. There's the second time zone. You can cover it up when you don't want it, and it allows you to read a reference time that is remote from where you are. Now, the watch has 3 mainspring barrels in order to achieve its extraordinary 144-hour power reserve. Turn it all over, and you can see there's a power reserve indicator on the back, and take a close look. That power reserve indicator is lumed. This is a wonderful machine-age look that's unlike any other Panerai watch. Is it a little bit fatuous? Yes, but it is undeniably fabulous. The timepiece, of course, in black ceramic, is wonderfully resistant to scratching, and if you hate watches that have been refinished, and you hate scratches, well, ceramic watches are for you. They can't be refinished, and they don't need to be. Let's do a lume shot. Okay, we're back with the PAM 350 by night. As you can see, plenty of lume on the dial side, and heck, the power reserve on the case back. This watch is a ton of fun, and it makes no bones about it. Is it designed to be taken way too seriously? No. And it's for the person who likewise doesn't take himself too seriously. A ton of fun, too much size, in your face, over the top. This thing is a Lamborghini for the wrist. Now let's say you want to strut your stuff in ceramic, but you don't have PAM 350 money. Well, the 2018 Zenith Day-Fi Classic Black Ceramic is for you. 41 millimeters in black ceramic. You can see the contrast of the polished bezel with the satin finish of the bezel top and the matte finish of the case flank. The case flank is a blasted finish. It's completely matte and light absorbing. The watch is wonderfully short across the wrist at 45 millimeters and only 10.9 millimeters thick. Throw it on the wrist, it's incredibly comfortable. Feather light as it's almost all ceramic, rubber, and sapphire, all of them light materials. The dial is open, but in spite of that fact, and you can peer straight down to the elite caliber, you still read the watch easily and intuitively. The watch includes a bidirectional quick set and hacking seconds, two features you won't find in a standard El Primero, and of course it includes the elite caliber 670, 50-hour power reserve, automatic winding, 4 Hz beat rate. You have the stop seconds, the bidirectional quick set, and all of this is water resistant down to 100 meters. So in addition to lightness, hypoallergenic qualities, and scratch resistance, the timepiece can also be taken swimming. Full rubber strap with matching deployed clasp. Note the Zenith star internally. This is a lovely piece that harks back to the Day-Fi sports watches of the 1970s in proportioning as well as shape. While the watch may look a little bit like modern day counterparts at LVMH, Hublot and Tag Heuer, remember, this case design was Zenith's in the Day-Fi back in the 1970s. All right, Breguet and the Marine everyone wishes they still made. This, of course, is the 5817. Launched in 2004, it was pretty much the perfect Breguet sports watch. 39 millimeters in stainless steel. The watch is only 12 millimeters thick, though it has straight lugs welded in profile, so hand-finished after being welded to the case. It does have a broad stance across the wrist because those straight lugs have a lot of presence and a lot of span. So although the watch is 39 millimeters, it looks bigger on the wrist, and as a Breguet, it certainly has gravitas. Let's take a quick look at the dial because this is one of the highlights of the watch. The timepiece features a solid gold dial that's then cut on a rose lathe. This is real reductive guilloche. Guilloche in the strict sense of the term involving cutting of the gold disc. Once the pattern is cut with the vintage rose lathe, it is then galvanized to create the silver and the blue. So solid gold dial, hand guilloche, and ultimately the most attractive color scheme on any Marine of this era. The blue and the silver in steel is the one everyone wants. The strap also blue, and of course the clasp is a little piece of art here with a wave motif on the flank, satin finish on the top. The wave motif continues underneath the strap. There are hollows to vent the wrist. There are strap minders also with the wave motif in steel. Note these components aren't cheap rubber. They are replaceable. When the strap ultimately expires, they will go on the replacement strap. You will keep them with the watch for life. The case is hand finished, cold rolled to create the coining, and then the lugs welded on with evidence of the weld removed. The strap is held to the case using screws and bars, no spring bars here, and the movement is a high horology Breguet 517 GG, also known as the Frederic Piguet 1150. It has a higher beat rate, so 65-hour power reserve, and note that the rotor itself has been engraved with a rose lathe, so it has that same lovely billowing spiral, nautical, almost nautilus, and I mean nautilus the creature, like turn and curvature and increasing radius to it. It has that wonderful seashell motif. What I also love is that the finish of the movement is properly high horology. You've got a deeply cut Côte de Genève, you've got mirrored anglage and black polished screw heads with satination on the wheels. Quick set for the date, and all of this 100 meters water resistant. So this is a true sports watch. Automatic, fully loomed stainless steel, and 100 meters water resistant with screw down crown, and once again, that wave motif. We near the end, but we're not there yet. This is truly one of the most important watches of all time. A watch built in approximately 2004, it is part of the first generation of the FP Journe Resonance. White gold dial, 38mm platinum French-made Eleanor case. The timepiece includes the caliber 1499 resonance chronometer in its first variant. Not just made of brass, and of course that went away in mid-2004. Not just made of brass, it is a different architecture than the later versions in gold. As you can see, the barrel bridge up at the top includes visible clicks and ratchet wheels. This would be reduced to 2 pivots with jewels visible and nothing else on later gold versions of the 1499. Now the idea was to take Janvier's principle of pendulum clock resonance and apply it to a wristwatch. FP Journe's third pocket watch, his third watch ever made, attempted to use resonance in a watch format. It did not work. Well, with the benefit of decades, he came back in 2000 and he made it work on a wristwatch. 2 sides, 42-hour power reserve on both sides, 21 6-beat rate, 6-position adjustment on each side, free sprung on both sides, with no mechanical coupling between the 2 sides. You can see there's a small rack and pinion with a gold pinion screw and a polished rack that is used to change the distance to fine-tune the resonance phenomenon. And once it takes hold, after about 7 to 10 minutes of running, once it takes hold, the 2 sides will be synchronized. So if one slows down, the other will speed it up. They self-correct in that fashion and vice versa. Now, because it can take 7 to 10 minutes for the 2 sides of the movement, both independent, to couple themselves by resonance, there is a flyback mechanism for the seconds hands, which might be out of sync to start, and they can be synchronized like so using the flyback. The 2 dials can be set separately, so it is a dual time watch, and the power reserve actually moves backward in the fashion of vintage marine chronometers, on which it was important to wind the chronometer on the deck of a ship exactly 24 hours after the previous winding, which is why when fully wound, those chronometer power reserves and this power reserve indicate 0 hours since winding. Turn the watch over again, and you can see that this case features the 04 stamp. The case date of manufacture or year of manufacture more or less ended in 2005, so that's a discontinued element. You can see the maker's mark of Eleanor outside of Paris, FP Journe's original French case supplier before he bought the company and moved it to Geneva as his own case shop, Boîtier de Genève, and of course you can see that the movement is finally finished. There's a lot of mirrored anglage here, Côte de Genève across the rhodium-plated brass bridges, and a very large engine turning on the base plate with all the screw heads black polished and satination of the wheels. A good-looking watch, and a very important one, as it is the Resonance 1. The brass movement, the 38mm case later discontinued, and the symmetrical 12-12 dial. A lot of folks are calling these early FP Journe watches vintage watches already. They're calling them timepieces to own from one of the modern masters of high horology in the burgeoning independent field. He was one of the first and one of the most successful, serially awarded. The watches are substantively different from anything else in the industry. And while I'm not necessarily a Journe groupie, I appreciate their historical importance and the fact that the early models, 38mm, Resonance 1, Tourbillon Remontoir, brass movements, they do hold a special place in the modern world of watch collecting, and they are only likely to become more collectible. That said, this right here is my favorite FP Journe watch, and this is one hell of a watch. The Chronomet Optimum, a watch that was eventually released in 2012 after being previewed for about a year, it represents FP Journe's most accurate mechanical watch, the best he can do with current watchmaking technology that is not quartz. Now this model features a more recent addition to the catalog. It is a 42mm case. Previously these were only available in 40mm size, and as you can see, it is a black label watch. So there is a boutique edition from FP Journe available at boutiques. It is a rose gold watch with a black dial, and then there is the black label, which since 2008 has been a boutique and espace exclusive, yes, but also an exclusive for existing FP Journe buyers. So this watch is very exclusive by dint of the fact that only a previous purchaser of a new FP Journe can buy it from a boutique. Moreover, only 2 examples per model can be made for a year, so production is constrained even by the standards of a brand that only makes at most 900 watches a year. 42 millimeters in platinum, it is sizable. It's almost 52 millimeters lug to lug, and as you can see, there is a lot going on the dial side, which is one of the reasons I actually prefer this watch in 42 millimeters. The dial doesn't seem as crowded or busy in the 42 millimeter case. Now you've got your seconds, you've got your hours and minutes. Note though that there is scrolling seconds on the front, and on the reverse side you have deadbeat seconds, and that's because the deadbeat seconds indicator is cued to this linear titanium spring that acts as a buffer between the 2 mainspring barrels and the escapement. Let's count all of the ways FP Journe made this watch his most accurate mechanical timepiece. Starting with 2 barrels, that helps to even out the torque from the mainsprings compared to a single barrel. But then you have the remontoir, which is between the escapement and the barrels in the powertrain. It separates the barrels from the escapement so that the barrels can never drive the escapement directly. Why is this important? Because every second the spring takes precisely the same amount of energy and meets it out to the escapement. So the barrels might be heavily wound, but they're not going to speed up the balance. They might be heavily discharged up to approximately 45 hours from winding, and again, they will not slow down the balance. After the remontoir, or the buffer if you will, there is a double direct impulse system using 2 titanium unlubricated wheels inspired by the Breguet natural escapement of 1802. That double direct impulse system extends power reserve, absolute power reserve, out to 70 hours. It also reduces the friction because each wheel impulses the balance only in its current direction of travel back and forth. Again, this reduces friction. Balance amplitude remains constant for the first 45 hours of operation. It is adjusted in 6 positions, not the chronometer standard of 5, so a 6-position adjusted free-sprung balance that holds tenaciously its adjustment in the face of bumps and concussion on the wrist, and then there is an overcoil hairspring to allow the hairspring to beat concentrically in any position. The overcoil is not a standard feature of FP Journe watches. You'll also note this movement is properly sized to the 42 millimeter case, the caliber 1510, 15 French lean in diameter, and 10 being the year 2010 that work started on the movement. That's how Journe names his movements, and you can see this one entirely in rose gold in a platinum case. You better believe the heft on the wrist is significant. The timepiece with a power reserve indicator that, as with the chronomètre à résonance, moves backwards, 0 indicating the point at which the watch is fully wound. I can't do any better than this, and by his own testament, neither can FP Journe. If you like the watches you see here, email me, tmosso@thewatchbox.com for purchase and pricing details.